Shoot, they're right over the top of me. Yeah, he's dead.
Oh, the crimp will force that back down into that wad, as well as the setback forces will to go. Welcome back to American Arms Channel, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Drake. Today, we're back at the reloading bench, finally, after quite the hiatus for the channel. It's been almost a year, but we're back here, and today we're going to look at a pretty killer non-tox 10-gauge load for ducks and geese. Today, as you can tell by the title of the video, we're going to be taking a look at a 2-ounce bismuth loading for the 10-gauge. Now, the motivation for me behind this, even though I love the Boss shot shells loading, which is a 2 1/16 ounce payload at approximately 1,300 feet per second box rating, the problem I had this year was I wasn't ready to purchase it on a Tuesday when it dropped, and by Thursday, when my paycheck came in and I was ready to spend the cash on a case or two, well, they were sold out. So you 10-gauge fans out there, me being one of them, gobbled that stuff up because we did not get a production run in 2021. And I contacted Boss Shot Shells and they let me know that we would not see another production run until 2023, which is incredibly disappointing. And if you're a Mighty 10 fan like me, just unacceptable. You got to use the Mighty 10 in late season at least, right? And if you want some hard-hitting non-tox loads that are a steel shot alternative and give you some higher pattern densities, well, bismuth is pretty much the most economical and feasible option, especially in 2022. The loads I'm going to show you today are not exactly the most cost-effective to put together, but they won't run you really any more than what have being purchased the Boss shot shells loads will. Of course, if you're reusing your hulls and you've got some stash of older components that didn't cost you as much as they would today, if you're to go out and try and source them, well, there you go. All you got to do is get yourself some bismuth shot and you've saved yourself quite a bit, maybe even more than you would have by buying by the case from Boss shot shells had you been able to grab them. Even if you did and you're a 10-gauge hand loader, this might be something you want to take a look at because honestly, I do believe I might be slightly exceeding the pattern potentials of Boss shot shells. And we'll get into why I'm able to do that because I can directly replicate what Boss shot shells is doing, which is fantastic. But let's take a look today at the components and what we can put together. I've got 2 different wads, so technically it's 2 different loads, but both are going to be 2 ounces of bismuth. Your choice of shot size. Right now I have on hand number 2s. Let's get right into the components. To start off, the star of the show is going to be some form of quality bismuth shot. Now, what I have here is number 2 shot size, and it is Sphero brand, and I acquired it from Ballistic Products, last year sometime, and when they have this in stock, they'll usually have it on sale, and the sale price for the number 2s, number 1s, number 3s, 4s, and smaller is usually right around $107 to $109 for a 7-pound bag, and so on and so forth. Slightly more for the larger shot sizes. They top out at BB. You can use roto metals, but it will change your pellet count. This is supposed to be 6% tin. These are just slightly lighter than other pellets. The average pellet should be coming in at a number 2 pellet that is at about 4.86 grains. This one comes in at about 4.65 to 66 grains. So I get a little bit higher pellet count, but that's okay. Even if the density isn't perfectly 9.6, it's close enough to make a significant difference over steel shot. So your choice of bismuth, but make sure it's quality. I will say that the Sphero brand is incredibly round and a very, very high quality shot. I will be getting some Rotometals number B shot size in a 10-pound bag very soon, and we might do a follow-up on that. Next, we're going to need to select a hull. You, of course, can pick any hull that you like, but for this loading, I'm going to completely replicate the Boss Shot Shells load, and I'm going to use a fresh Cheddite hull. This is primed with their factory primer, which is a CX2000. It's effectively just a Cheddite brand 209 standard performance primer. It is not a Magnum primer. And this is the exact hull and primer you get when you buy Boss Shot Shells. So same quality of component there. They are not the best hull to reload, but they are extremely high quality for fresh loadings. I find that if you're going to resize these, a ring resizer really tears them up, and you're going to want to utilize a collet resizer. Now you have 2 choices on how to put this together, and dependent upon the wad that you select or that you have on hand is going to depend upon the components that you load. First up, we're going to talk about the Remington SP10 wad loading. Now, there's plenty of these guys floating out there in the wild. I'm sure plenty of you 10-gauge hand loaders have them available and probably have a good stash of them. I know I have a significant stash, but I don't want to use them all up because they're quite useful and quite versatile. The PT1044, or the Gualandi 10-gauge wad, which is what Boss Shot Shells uses, comes onto the market randomly at times. It seems like your best chances are in early spring, late winter to early spring. That's when they showed up. I did not get any this year because I did not intend to have to load my own bismuth loads, but you can substitute the PT1044 or Gualandi 10-gauge wad for the SP10. It really won't make too much of a difference, although of course work up your load again if you swap any wad. Any component, you need to work up your loads. With that, you're going to of course want to utilize a buffer, but you're also going to want a Mylar sheet. This Mylar sheet is going to do a couple of things for you. One, and the most important, is protect the pellets from scrubbing on the bore, and that is going to keep you from having excessive pellet deformation on the outside perimeter of the shot load, which will cause flyers. So a single one of these is great. These are pre-cut to shape. They are from Ballistic Products or Precision Reloading. I do not remember who I got these from. These are the thin Mylar wraps. I think these are Ballistic Products product. I would recommend though that you get your own sheets of Mylar, save yourself some money, and just cut them to size. But the way these are cut are just about perfect, and they work pretty dang well. You'll need some form of a buffer. This is Precision Reloading's buffer. I highly recommend you pick this up. It comes in 22-ounce jugs or cans, whatever you want to call it. This is by far the absolute best shot shell buffer that you can purchase for shotguns and shot shell reloading. Period. End of story. It's the best you can buy. You can use flour, but flour does attract moisture inside of shells, so you will need a really good sealant. But this is honestly, because it is a synthetic product and it is extremely granular, it is going to be your best choice. This is the Precision Reloading PRPSB22. Our other wad, which we will also be loading with the precision reloading buffer, is going to be the Ballistic Products multi-metal. Now, the multi-metal became the TPS. You can substitute a TPS for it. The multi-metal is a little bit more rigid. You can also try using the BPD 10, but the multi-metal 10 or the TPS 10 will be an excellent choice for this. Again, if you swap to the BPD 10, that will require you to rework your load to make sure your pressures are in a good place and confirm your velocities and patterns. So TPS and multi-metal. If you got multi-metals laying around, that's what I'm using, but you can use the TPS wad. In the base of that, we are going to place approximately a 1/4 inch, a 1/5 to a 1/4 inch foam cushion. You can use felt, you can use cork. I have an enormous number of these foam cushion wads available to me, so that is what I am using. I know the tungsten loaders, the guys that really like tinkering with the tungsten hand loads, absolutely love these foam cushion wads. They're super durable. They're fantastic. They work really well, very versatile. And you will utilize this inside your wad because with the multi-metal or TPS wad, we do not have a piston to absorb shock from that powder charge exploding, expanding behind it. There's no cushion, so you don't want to kick those pellets in the ass. They are soft and they also can be brittle, so they will break and blow patterns. So you want to soften that blow, but it doesn't take too much. It also makes sure that that 2-ounce charge comes right to the top and just a little bit over with the buffer. So when you compress it with your fold crimp, it's going to sit perfectly. We are going to use Vitavori 3N38 once again. If you've watched the 1 5/8 high velocity steel shot load, you'll know that this is a perfect choice for that load, and it is my selection. I have plenty of this for my shot shell reloading needs. This is specifically a 10 gauge powder for me, but you can substitute other powders. Primarily, you're going to want to look at Alliant Blue Dot or Alliant Steel. Steel and Blue Dot will both be capable of pushing these 2-ounce loads at well up to 1,250 to 1,350 feet per second, depending upon, of course, your environmental conditions and altitude above sea level, as well as your barrel length, so on and so forth. Too many variables to name, but that magical 1,250 to 1,300 foot per second range is perfectly capable with those powders. I like my Vitavori 3N38, and that is what I'm going to show you here today because this powder is extremely clean burning, extremely efficient, and also very versatile. Let's get right into loading up these cartridges. So to start, we're going to start with the full-length shot cup. Now this is intended for tungsten, steel. You can utilize this for bismuth, obviously. You can also use it for heavy lead payloads. But it is a one-piece wad with a gas skirt on the bottom, or a gas seal on the bottom. So there is no cushion. Once again, the reason why we are using our foam cushion wad. Again, I've got it cut to about a 1/4 inch here. A little bit more, a little bit less. I've not found the variance to really affect anything. We're going to put that right in there, and I'm going to use my little ball starter here to push that down. I'm just going to tamp it on in, and voila, I have a nice cushion in the base. You do not need to put any sort of overshot card or anything. These little wads are perfectly durable, and as we'll see when we get to the patterns, they do not adversely affect the rear of the shot charge whatsoever, and if they do, it's a few enough pellets that you're really not going to care anyways. Now that we've got that cushion wad seated, we're going to set that wad down, grab our hull, and take our pre-metered 41 grains of Vitavori 3N38, and let's get the powder funnel just so I don't spill anything. Get that all in there. I really love 3N38. Just everything about it, super clean burning in the 10 gauge. Very, very high quality. Very low standard deviations for a shotgun. So there we go. Now, of course, we're going to take our wad, place it in our hull, and tamp it down. And there we go. Now we are ready for our shot charge. All right, we're here at the scale. This is just an old kitchen slash everything scale. I have it set to ounces. I'm going to use this little tiny solo cup for shots here, and I'm going to place it on, of course. You see that comes out at 0.095 ounces. We're going to zero that guy out. And we're just going to get our shot charge going. And I'll spare you this the second time, but we'll just watch it this time. All right, we're at 2.010 ounces. That means probably pellet over. Let's see here. And I was right, exactly 2 ounces there. And so that is 191 pellets of the Sphero brand number 2 bismuth shot. Now, if you have slightly less tin content, depending upon batch, depending upon manufacturer, you will maybe be down around the 180, 185 pellet count range. If it's even lighter, which you would kind of want it to not be, it might be up around the 195, 196 pellet count. It's always good to confirm so that when you pattern test, you actually know that you're getting a very, very finite and accurate percentage on your patterns, and you can get a lot better data and something to really read off of instead of just guessing in the dark. So do cross-reference not only your generic tables for how much each pellet of a different material shot type is going to weigh per its shot size for the diameter of that sphere, but also confirm that with your equipment on hand. You can also do this with a balance scale, but this digital scale does a pretty good job. And we can see there it's bouncing a little bit, but it's right at 2 ounces. So 191 pellets. Now that we have our shot charge prepared, we can take our prepped hull. And I find it's just easy. I mean, you can use any sort of method you want, but I am truly hand loading here. I'm just going to cup it and use my fingers to guide in that shot. We're going to give that a little bit of shake. Now, if we look down in here, we can see that we have pellets just at the top of that shot shell cup. And that shot cup will actually contain all of that, including the buffer, once we seal the hull. The crimp will force that back down into that wad, as well as the setback forces will further compress that down. The only reason we're overflowing, quote unquote, but we're topped out is because we have that cushion wad, which is acting as a spacer right now. So when we compress that with the crimp, that's going to take up. It's also going to put nice pressure into our crimp and make a really solid load. And if you've got your crimp set right on your press, you won't have any buffer leak. You will not need to have any sealant really, or use an overshot card, which is another component that can add pressures and do some weird stuff, or blow centers out of your pattern or put little holes. There's a lot of finesse in all this stuff, but generally for me, what I am finding and what I have found in my research and looking at Tom Roster's load manuals, looking at a lot of stuff online, forums, a lot of guys who have had a lot more years for loading, specifically the 10 gauge, but many shot shells as well. The way that I'm doing this is probably one of the ideal ways to load these bismuth loads. Finally, we're going to add approximately 5 cc's, and you can cheat it a little bit because there's quite a bit in there, but I've got a 2.5 cc dipper, and I'm just going to pour that in nice and even, and it will pretty much, because it's so small, start sifting down. And you're just going to tap around until it all disappears, and then you're going to grab your next 2.5 cc's. And you're going to dump in. If you try to dump all 5 in at once, you're going to overflow the hull, and then you're just going to have a mess. So why do that? Just take your time. And if you really need to, you can grab it and vibrate. Don't try to really shake the hull too much, but just vibrate the hull a little bit. And you should see the top pellets just sort of exposed there. I don't know if the camera can get that, but I hope it can. So now we are ready to crimp our hull. All right, we have our charged shot shell hull here, and we're going to come down on the pre-crimp. And I find it's helpful if you're using one of these Mech 600 Juniors to hold the base even when it's in its little keeper slot there, the little rim holder. And I like to come down a couple times and just really try to set that memory on that plastic. Take note, I'm not completely folded in yet, and I've got some creases coming down the side, so I'm actually fairly high on this crimp, so there's not too terribly much. If you want to take some calibers to it, let's see here. We've got right about 0.438, so 0.440 of a crimp height on that pre-started, so that should be good to go. You don't have to be as neurotic and OCD as I am, but I do like to try and get that memory set before I send it home. And now when we're sending it home, I do the same thing. I kind of slowly work the hull and check on it and see we're getting a very nice even. And if you're loading stuff for precision, if you just want it to look really good, you want it to work well in a repeater, doing this kind of stuff doesn't really hurt. You can see we're just about to close up now, and I'm just going to finish it off. Setting your press up to get a nice crimp is pretty critical. And we always are going to get a little bit of buffer leak on the top here. So I'm going to tap that excess off, but we can see we've got a practically perfectly sealed hull right there. And that is just pretty. That's just very, very pretty. And no shake, very well put together. This is an awesome setup. Very clean looking. Quite proud of this if I do say so myself. That's about a perfect crimp. That looks factory. If you learn from your mistakes, you can make some pretty good looking ammunition with pretty simple equipment. And well functioning too. Very well patterning, as we will see. Let's take a look at loading the SP10 wad 2-ounce load. All right, just like before, Cheddite hull. I'm going to grab our Vitavori 3N38 here. We are actually running a different charge weight with the SP10 wad to achieve the same velocities. It's actually 2 grains heavier at 43 grains. So 43 grains of 3N38 to reach the same relative pressures and velocities with this power piston wad, which makes sense seeing how you don't have as great of resistance. You've got a cushion section that will collapse and provide you more expansion for that powder, which works well with slow burning powders and heavy lead loads. So there's something to consider. So yes, when you change up between a full length gas sealed wad and a short cup or power piston wad, you will have powder differences even with the same charge weights. So you're going to top out much faster, but you could technically say that the full length gas sealed wad is more efficient than the power piston, but this one might have a slight edge overall for an average by about, with patterns, maybe 1 to 2%. Evenness is also relatively in the same ballpark, and pattern to pattern, you know, that can change also depending upon how you evaluate it. So very subjective. Both are very, very close, which is why I'm showing you both loadings. So let's throw our 43 grains of 3N38, a little bit of spherical buffer on the table, making stuff wobble and slide around. So we're going to set that guy aside. We're going to grab our thin mylar wrap, get that ready, put our wad in, seat it. And now adding this step, adding this component is as simple as just rolling this guy up. And we're going to tilt that shot shell cup, and we're going to stick her right on down in there, let it expand. Then we're going to use our finger to force it down into the bottom. You do not want it going around the outside of the shot cup. You want it inside the shot cup. And effectively what we're doing is we're doing the same thing as what we accomplished with the multi-metal wad, with the full-length wad. We are just protecting the entirety of the payload from the bore. And we're not worried about the bore, really. We're just worried about getting scrubbing of those pellets and defecting the pattern, causing flyers. Irregular shaped pellets do not fly straight. Just keep that in mind. That's why steel shot can pattern so well, because it always stays round, relatively. And now let's throw our pre-measured shot charge in here. Again, just making sure our mylar is all the way to the bottom. Just a little tap, and there we go. Once again, we're going to throw 5
cc's of that buffer, and that's going to come out to be like less than 4 grains of buffer, so it's really not that much. This buffer is pretty dang light. I might be wrong on the grains, but I've seen velocity differences, and there are some pressure differences with buffer, so do keep that in mind. But with these loads, you definitely, it's maybe a half a grain difference in velocities between buffered and non-buffered loads. And the Mylar, of course, has some weight too. So there we go. We've got our pellets just peeking above there. And once again, this is pretty high. It looks like it's ready for a roll crimp, but what's going to happen when we fold this guy up and actually set that crimp is it's going to shove all those components down into that hull, and it's going to compress that powder and maybe start to set that power piston a little bit. So it gives it good firm resistance, and when you get a good crimp on it, like we did with the multi-metal wad load, it's going to seal it right up. So let's do that again. All right, so let's set that pre-crimp here. Starter. Again, I'm just getting that guy set so it has some memory. And when it's ready, and she looks good and she's not unfolding herself, I'm going to start slowly but surely compressing that down so I get a nice crimp, and I'm rolling it because my press is slightly clunky and it doesn't always provide a level crimp, so I find rolling it is best. And there we go. We are set, and we got a little bit more spillage on that one than I wanted, but that's okay because we are sealed up and ready to go. All right, we've got our hammers loaded up here. Let's get them in our Mag 10, sporting a Briley thin wall 10 gauge 0.745 inch light full choke, and see how these guys pattern sample at 40 yards.
Buffered with a Mylar wrap. This is a fresh Cheddite hull.
So we're going to take a look here at some shots down range, the recoil. Of course, going to look at the patterns, and we're also going to check out some slow-mo footage.
Photograph is accurate.
Aggressive shoulder position here, neutral stance. It's a 2-ounce load doing 1250 to 1300. It's going to push it even in 11 1/4 pound gun, but it does not hurt if you know how to manage recoil. And honestly, I was probably too stiff-shouldered. If you lean into it a little bit and you let your body absorb it, it's not that bad. You can see that one there. Really, the muzzle doesn't jump that much. I'm just letting it rise because I'm mostly focused on getting on the pattern board. I'm not in a hunting scenario. With reduced speed here, we can see it's really not that bad of an impulse. It's just kind of a long push. Now this is pretty cool. This is with the SP10 wad, the Mylar wrap and buffer. We can see here as it's fired, you can see the shot charge on the right side of the screen here sending itself down range, and that Mylar wrap coming off about 5 yards in front of the chronograph. We'll see it again here. Watch for it right there in front of the chronograph while we see everything else fly down range in a really straight, tight pattern. It's just absolutely marvelous. That is a little bit over 6 foot by 6 foot pattern board. And here's the results. Here is the multi-metal 10 wad loading, 91.1%. That's extra full territory. We can see we've got a little bit of lopsidedness, but I've relatively put myself in center with the pattern evaluation, and it looks pretty damn good. Now we're looking at the SP10 wad, and once again, it did beat it out, but at only 1-some odd percent, they're effectively equal. This one to the eye looks a little bit more visually pleasing, but of course an average of these patterns out of the same gun and choke would be more appropriate. Outstanding performance nonetheless. Here we have the multi-metal 10 wad. This one went down range. We can see we've got some carbon and some burn scrubbing on it. That's pretty standard for these clear plastic wads to see that, especially when they're coming out of a tight choke. We see no bridging signs, no problems with the pellets trying to press through the wad pedals. We can see some foam and buffer stuck there in the bottom. No pellets stuck in it. Absolutely fantastic. It isn't as open as I would like to see, but you really can't argue with the pattern, so I'm not going to tinker with them. This is out of the bag wadding, and it works great. Here's the SP10 wad. We can see the power pistons crushed a little bit. Has the same, we'll call it charring or burning effect. Looks really good. Has a nice opening to it. And these were all found about 32 yards downrange, so not too far from the pattern board itself. And here's the top view of it, looking pretty dang good. No irregularities, and this was pretty consistent across the load development regardless of powder charge and velocity. So let's take a look now at a SP10 wad that did not utilize the Mylar wrap. I can tell you right now the pattern was good, but it was nowhere near as good as with the Mylar wrap. We can see some tattering around the edges, a little bit of bridging occurring on that pedal. And while what was in the shot cup was protected, it was not entirely efficient, right? So that extra Mylar wrap helps protect the wad a little bit, gives even a little bit more cushion on the base side of that shot column, but everything above those wad pedals is on the periphery of that shot charge touching the bore. And if we're scrubbing the bore, of course, we're going to be deforming pellets, and we're going to experience more flyers because an irregular shaped sphere, well, it's not truly a sphere, is it? So it's not going to have good aerodynamics, and that's where your flyer is going to come from. So you're counting more on the core of your shot charge, so on and so forth. So really that Mylar wrap or a full-length wad is ideal. That doesn't mean that it's a bad load not having the Mylar wrap, but it is important to consider. So let's take a look at what these two cartridges total overview is with everything considered. Load number one is going to be with the SP10 wad and Mylar wrap. We're running 43 grains of Vitivori 3 and 3/8, and of course the standard is going to be 5 cc's of precision reloading spherical buffer. Velocities are going to be right around the 1285 foot per second mark is what I'm going to call it. But there is some room in here to potentially bump the powder charge up. If you change out the powder charge and you work up, you might get a higher velocity. But the magical patterning and magical effectiveness numbers, especially for the larger shot where you don't need to push it as fast to get the same sort of effect, and honestly pushing it faster doesn't do much for you in the long run, you know, that 1250 to 1350 foot per second range landing sort of in the middle of that is going to be just perfect. So I really wouldn't worry about that too much. And then of course load number two is going to be with the multi-metal wad. Of course that became the TPS. The TPS is a substitute, but of course work up your loads every time. I'm just some guy on the internet. But we're running 41 grains of Vitivori 3 and 3/8 through that, and we should have roughly the same velocity. So with the lack of the Mylar wrap and utilizing a fairly cheap foam or cork or insert, you know, your favorite felt or some other product of spacer, some base cushion wadding there, and you've got a pretty dang good load. So again, it's half dozen of one, 6 of the other with these two loads, but effectively with the pattern samples out of the same gun and choke at the same exact distance, providing the same velocities, you're getting effectively the same pattern. A 1 to 2% difference is nothing. That variance can occur shot to shot, but the consistency of the powder that's being utilized in my loads, the consistency of the entirety of the load is extremely impressive. So highly recommended. Again, work up your charges when you're developing your own load for your gun, but really I'm going to tell you that the improved modified through full chokes are going to provide you the best results. You can go extra full with this, but you're going to need to test in your gun to see whether or not it actually gives you anything. I think improved modified and light full are going to be the best for 10 gauge guys looking for that 30 to 45 yard middle ground, and even being able to have that little bit of mulligan or extended range with the larger shot if you go to a number 1 B, a BB, or even a triple B bismuth pellet, getting out into that 55-yard, 60-yard range.
Well, guys, I really hope you enjoyed today's load video. I know that I am very stoked to get into waterfowl season 2022-23 and give these bismuth loads a try. Again, about the velocity, generally, depending upon your conditions and depending upon atmosphere conditions, chronograph, everything, you're going to find that the loads that I am demonstrating here out of a 28-inch barrel, effectively a 29-inch barrel with the choke, so 28 to 30 is going to run right around the 1250 to 1300 foot per second mark. There's really not a lot of reason to push it past that. You might see some erraticacy develop with your patterns. You also really are not going to see that much benefit by shoving bismuth over 1300, 1350 foot per second. You know, that 1250 to 1350 foot per second range is really ideal for lead, ITX 10, bismuth, any of the tungsten irons that are running anywhere from 9.6-ish where bismuth is up through about 11.2 grams per cubic centimeter in density. All of those shot materials are going to relatively perform the best at those velocities. You need to get it down range just fast enough to make sure you maintain energy at distance, but you're not over pushing it where it's really going to slow down dramatically between muzzle and 25 yards. We see that a lot with steel shot, and it's just not necessary to throw shot extremely fast. You lose more in the long run. It's a less efficient load, it kicks harder, patterns can be harder to control, so on and so forth. And also it gets tricky to put together heavier loads like these 2 ounces, and 2 ounces for a 10 gauge isn't much. And they're relatively the same height as about a 2 1/8 or 2 1/4 ounce load in a lead shot load here in the 10 gauge at 2 ounces of bismuth. So really driving it any faster, you're just not going to see a lot of benefits, but if that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do. I just highly encourage intelligent, well-balanced, well-patterning loads. They will do the best for you. They'll save your wallet a little bit, they'll save your shoulder a little bit, and they will really not be any noticeably different on game when it really comes down to it. If you do your part and you put the birds in the pattern, it's gonna kill them. So guys, I really hope you enjoyed this, and do remember, you don't have to use #2 shot size. Pick your poison when it comes to shot size and purpose. Just always load safe, be smart hunting, God bless, and keep your powder dry. We'll see you next time here on American Arms Channel.